Hello and I welcome you all to Global News Factory. I am your host Vikrant. In this video, I am covering two topics. First, in detail about the Kuril Islands. Japan is poking the Russian bear now. Chinese media is reporting that Japan may even invade these Kuril Islands and attempt to seize them forcefully from Russia. We will discuss the key developments and yes, a history lesson too. And then I'm going to talk about this person on your screen, Drew Pavlou, a loyal servant of the West and Zelensky lover, called my views illiterate when I countered his anti India rant on X. Generally, I don't care what these slaves of the West say about India, but this time I decided to teach him a proper lesson. Let's start. Japan's new Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi has pressed two red buttons at once. One says China, the other says Russia. Within weeks of taking office, she has shaken both superpowers. First, she poked Beijing on Taiwan issue. She said Japan would come to defend Taiwan if China attacks. That was not a whisper, that was a siren. Now she is poking the bear too on the issue of Kuril Islands. Takaichi has a clear image. She is seen as a nationalist. In Moscow and in Beijing, they think she wants to avenge Japan's past defeats. They are not laughing, they are cautious. On December 2nd, Russia and China held their 20th round of security consultations. 20 round is not a coffee chat, it is serious business. They agreed that they need to deepen their cooperation to counter the new administration in Japan. Translation: Tokyo just moved, and now Moscow and Beijing will move together. At that meeting, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi sat with Russia's Security Council Secretary Sergei Shoigu. Both agreed to jointly counter Japanese militarism. That phrase is heavy. It pulls history into the room. It also tells you how they now see Tokyo under Takaichi. The important twist is China's role. Before Xi Jinping, Chinese leaders did not look eager to help Russia on the Kuril Islands question. In fact, you go back in history and you will find the opposite. In 1965, Mao Zedong publicly supported Japan's stance against Russia on these islands. That's right, Beijing once echoed Tokyo on this file. And then after the 1969 Sino-Soviet border clashes, China began marking the islands, the Kuril Islands, as Japanese territory on its maps, but with a firm note, occupied by Russia. In the 1970s, China condemned the Soviet desire to permanently occupy the Kurils, as they said, which many in Japan call the Northern Territories. Then came 1989, Premier Li Peng arrived in Japan. He told Prime Minister Noboru Takeshita that China supported Japan's demand for the return of the Northern Territories, and he reaffirmed that China thought Japan's claim was justified. So yes, for a long time, Japan's claim looked pretty solid from Beijing's point of view too. Let's step into the history of the Kuril Islands in simple words. Japan says its claim is rooted in the 1855 Treaty of Shimoda with Russia. That treaty gave Japan sovereignty over the four southernmost islands. Those islands are Kunashir, Iturup, Shikotan, and the Habomai group. These are basically the Kuril Islands. Their current status was decided under Joseph Stalin. Just before World War II ended, he saw Japan was down and ordered Soviet forces to seize the four islands by force. Japanese locals were kicked out, Russian settlers were brought in, and since 1945, the Kuril Islands have been under continuous Russian administration. But here is the catch. This happened after Japan had already surrendered to the Americans Tokyo never accepted this annexation as legit. And because of that, Japan and the Soviet Union never signed a formal peace treaty to end the World War II. Yes, imagine that. A world war that still does not have a final handshake between these two. And now you see why Japan pushed its claim, and now you see why, for years, even China firmly supported Tokyo on the paper trail. But things changed after 1989. The Tiananmen Square crisis left Beijing isolated on the world stage, and China needed friends again. It looked to Moscow. Slowly, the clear public support in China for Japan's claim on the Kuril Islands began to fade away. The tone softened, the maps, the words, the posture, everything began to shift. It is also not true that Russia never tried to solve the issue. In 2018, Vladimir Putin and Japan's then Prime Minister Shinzo Abe agreed to try and resolve it. Abe worked hard to build a personal bond with Putin. At one point, it looked like a deal was close. The idea on the table was that Russia would return two of the four islands to Japan, and that would have been a big break in a very old wall. But as you can imagine, the talks collapsed. The window closed, and with it, a special chance of peace. And then came the Xi Jinping era shift. 2 years ago, Xi Jinping made it clear that he did not support Japan's claim over the Russian held islands. That was a sharp U turn and a big blow for Tokyo. For Japan, it was like the floor moved. Yesterday's quiet support from China turned into today's cold shoulder. The result is what we see now, a Japan which is controlled by Washington, provoking both Russia and China at the same time. One on Taiwan, the other on the Kurils. It is a two-front argument in a very dangerous neighborhood. The problem with states like Japan is that they don't truly believe in dialogue. They want hard lines, not soft landings. The irony is that dialogue almost worked. Abe was close. Russians respect dialogue, but even Abe could not complete the job. Maybe there was some kind of pressure from the US. Maybe there were headwinds inside Japan. Whatever the reasons, the finish line turned into a mirage. Let's talk about today's map. The Kuril Islands are not just rocks and snow, they are now vital to Russia's security. Over the past decades, the US it has heavily militarized several islands of Japan. You can see air bases, ships, missiles, logistics, the full menu. More than 55,000 heavily armed troops are stationed in Japan. So the Kurils act like a buffer between Russia's far east and that big American footprint. Moscow has responded by reinforcing the Pacific side, missile systems, new infrastructure in the Kurils, more military posture. If this sounds like a chessboard, that is because it actually is. And once the US steps onto a square, the game rarely stays simple. American intervention has complicated many issues. This one now feels close to unresolvable. My friends, there is another warning light blinking. In October, Chinese media and experts publicly cautioned Moscow that Japan may try a military move to seize the Kurils by force. Japan's military is not huge, but it is modern and well equipped with advanced American weapons. Now, some experts say that Japanese leaders might think, oh, Russia is already busy in the West, in Ukraine war, it is distracted, and that the East is softer. That kind of miscalculation can lead to disaster and an all-out war. There is also a shadow angle that will make you sit up. Ukraine, yes, there are fears that Kiev might try sabotage inside the Kuril Islands. How? So here is the thread. Many of the Russians who settled here after the Kuril move by Stalin, they were actually Ukrainians. Some Japanese observers claim that a large number of people now living in the Kuril Islands are descendants of Ukrainians who were settled here by the Soviets after 1945. Estimates from pro Ukrainian and Japanese sources even say this number could be as high as 60%. Now, if that is true, it creates a sensitive social web. You could see how Kiev might try to tap into it for covert operations against Russian military sites. This is the view of those Japanese observers. This story is not just about flags and maps, it is about families, roots, and quiet loyalties that can be turned into dangerous tools. If Japan and Ukraine both move on this file, it could get ugly fast. But make no mistake, if Japan makes a wrong move on Taiwan or on the Kurils, it could face the wrath of two superpowers at the same time. Russia will not pull its punches in the east, China will not blink in the south, and both now feel that Sanai Takaichi is pushing the temperature up, not down. Japan needs to be careful what it signs up for. Words have consequences. If Japan wants peace and respect, it needs calm hands and cool words. Because when you poke a dragon and a bear in the same week, even the ocean around you starts to feel small, very small. Moving on, let's fly to Australia now, the land of kangaroos. A young activist named Drew Pavlou is shaking his fist at India. Why? Because he thinks India has turned hostile to the West. You know how Indians are on social media, especially on X? We speak our mind. After Trump's betrayal, we Indians are sharing our views loudly about the West and about the ruling elites who behave like loyal slaves in places like South Korea, Canada, Japan, and Australia. That chorus has upset many people who cannot handle a single word against their masters in Washington. Drew Pavlou is one of them. He is a nobody in real power, but I am mentioning him because this is personal. He reacted to Putin's visit to India and declared that, oh, India is moving against the West. For him, India becomes anti West the moment it hosts Putin. When Indians roasted him, Drew Pavlov, on X, he warned that India was being hostile to the West and that this could damage India-West ties. He even posted this line, I'm quoting, I oppose Pakistan, but your hostility towards the West is causing me to strongly rethink the future of our ties, unquote. What a dramatic script. So here is a small reminder. The West has backed Pakistan for decades. We simply do not care if the West continues that or not. In fact, Australia too already has a long-standing defense cooperation with Pakistan. You can see this image on your screen. Pakistan's generals often visit Australia. Here is one picture on your screen. I have many more. There is much wider cooperation than we can imagine. And that is their choice. Fine, we Indians do not care. And I said exactly that on X in response to Pavlov's silly claims. And he replied by calling my response illiterate. And then he doubled down again. He said anti-West hostility from Indian extremists made him question whether they can ally with India in the future. So to Pavlov and to all those Western puppets who think they can blackmail India by waving the Pakistan card, let me say this clearly. We Indians do not care who you choose to befriend. Date Pakistan, marry Pakistan, adopt Pakistan. Good luck with that. India is not asking for your support. India does not even need approval from these elites, these slaves in Australia. In fact, it is Australia that needs the Indian economy to survive. Ask your colleges, ask your exporters, ask your tourism boards. The numbers speak even when these slaves shout. But these slaves in Australia have a strange habit. They love shooting themselves in the foot. First, they poke China for no reason, and now they're poking Indians for simply defending India's interests. And then they act shocked when Indians answer back. This is the classic script. You first create the provocation, you preach about values, and then cry about hostility when the other side replies in the same language. Now, let me make one more thing plain. India has never been hostile to anyone in the West. We do business, we talk, we disagree, that is normal. Yet, Europe and the US slapped sanctions on India and tried to lecture us about our choices. And now they accuse Indians of being hostile to the West because we refuse to sit quietly. That is rich. If you keep calling us hostile for defending our own interests, do not be surprised when the volume goes up. It will. You will have only yourself to blame. Now, this is not about one tweet from a random activist, a random pro Ukraine activist, anti China activist. This is about respect. You cannot treat India like a junior partner and then panic when India acts like a sovereign nation. Hosting leaders we choose is not anti West, it is pro India. Speaking our mind on X is not extremism, it is free speech. The same thing the West loves to lecture about. If Drew Pavlou wants to rethink this because Indians spoke up, that says more about him than about India. We will keep speaking, we will keep choosing, and we will not ask for your permission. And my friends, that is all in today's episode. Thank you very much for joining. You're watching GNF.